We are recording. Hello, Dr. Leanne. How are you?
I'm good. How you doing this morning?
I'm doing fantastic, and thank you so much for being on the show today. I am really excited to about this topic today. I'm really excited about your background too, as well. I know when Dr. Lana suggested that, for my podcast, she said you got to talk to Leanne. She's an amazing woman. She has so much wisdom. And when I look at the back of your background, and I did a little research about your experiences, and I thought, okay, we got to talk about this. This is where we need to go. Humanity needs to kind of listen to all that wisdom that you have. And I especially love like your post on Instagram. I really, really enjoy that. So just a little shout out, everybody. You got to follow Dr. Leanne Whitney on her Instagram because it is really amazing. But before we get into this, I just want to say a quick little shout out to everybody that's listening. I haven't had a chance to kind of say thank you to everybody all around the world now. This is kind of really interesting about podcasts. So I want to say thank you to my friends and people, I call my peeps down in the US there, my brothers and sisters down there across the border. Also over in the UK, New Zealand, Australia, Singapore, and if I miss anybody, the Netherlands. Forgetting about my friends in the Netherlands. Thank you so much. And thank you also for the lovely donations to help out this show. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. That being said, Dr. Leanne. All right, let's share some of that beautiful wisdom that you had here. Now, especially about your experience, because this doesn't happen a lot. With your experience with I guess you call it the pure consciousness event that you had in your life. Maybe
Yes.
can you walk us through that and what that really was all about?
Sure. I'm going to go there, but first I'm also going to congratulate you on starting this and spreading it
Thank you.
far and wide and sharing the love and getting love back. So
Thank you.
well done on that creative venture.
Thank you.
Um, yes. So my pure consciousness event, boy, um, I was in a yoga room at the time. I had been practicing, this was 2000. I had begun meditating and practicing yoga in 98, but not daily. 2000 is when I really developed a daily practice, but I wasn't yet familiar with yoga philosophy or yoga psychology. I'd done some bhakti, some chanting, but I hadn't read any of the texts that underlie really any of the reasons why we would do the practices. And I was leaving the yoga room. This was July of 2000, and I had what is known in the religious studies literature as a pure consciousness event, which was basically just a flash. It was a flash of light. Lasted probably about a second, um, very brief.
Wow.
But in it, all subject-object distinctions broke down. And the awareness that consciousness is all there is was the knowing, was the event itself.
Wow.
And yeah, it radically changed my life. There was really no going back from there. It didn't eradicate all the anxiety and stress that I had in my nervous system, or it didn't eradicate all the patterns in my mind, all my own, I'll say neurotic, patterning coming up through Euro-American culture and in a family that has some mental illness and alcoholism. So it didn't take away anything that had really deeply impacted my life with vines and uh, complexes, as we say, in depth psychology. But at the same time, there was no going back from that knowledge that consciousness is all there is.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Like, how would you integrate that experience back? And I guess that in some ways you kind of explained it, like you didn't, like it didn't make it easy for you. Like it's like you still had all these things that you still had to work through. You had all the life lessons and all the experiences that you had. And I was always, I guess I was fascinated about it. Like, did that just leave you? But apparently it didn't. It just, they kind of gave you the look through the window. You were Dorothy. You got behind the curtain. You looked around and you kind of saw what was going on. And then it's like, okay, we're going to close that up and then deal with it.
Right.
That's what it kind of seemed like. So like, how did you integrate that? Like, I mean, most people, like I've heard, like close to near death experiences have something similar to that, and they have a hard time integrating back into, I guess, society in general. Like, how did you find that process for yourself?
Oh, it was definitely very challenging. I didn't even talk to anybody about it for about the first 2 years. I just tried to sort of sit on it myself. But again, because it didn't eradicate all the distress, let's just say within my own nervous system, I was still sitting in all that distress. But yet I knew that consciousness was all there was. So from that moment on, my life until this day is the marrying of, well, if consciousness is all there is, then what the hell is going on in this very complex state of humanity, especially the suffering and the injustice and the inequality and the, environmental collapse? Like, if consciousness is all there is, then why are we seemingly so blind to that?
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's a 20 plus year journey now. And I do, my practice is called transformational coaching. I work with people one-on-one, but it's a process of integration. That's what I do with all my clients every day, is work towards integrating um, the patterns of the mind that are bound in suffering and in distress into this field of pure consciousness.
So that being said, I mean, how did we get that? How do we get so stuck? Like, where did it really start for us? And I mean, with humanity in general, it just seems like we kind of do this cyclic thing. We kind of get a little bit there, and then we just fall back into these patterns again. We kind of get out of there, and we fall back in these patterns again. How do we get stuck? And is there a pathway out of it?
Those are great questions, and a historian I am not.
Okay.
But clearly, when we look at certain civilizations, look at I mean, the yoga tradition is what I draw heavily from. So my doctorate is in depth psychology, but I really do an East-West blend, because that event happened in a yoga room, and I actually started studying yoga and depth psychology roughly around the same time. So my practice is a blend of those two disciplines predominantly. So, you have the history of India. It's an ancient civilization, and yoga was developed over thousands of years by hundreds of thousands of people. So it's not just one figurehead. If you're familiar with the Upanishads, which is one of the philosophical texts underlying yoga, they don't even sign the document. They don't even say, this person wrote it. There's no names associated to it. So they've really understood that this knowledge is structured in consciousness. That's their metaphysic, that consciousness is all there is. And then yoga, the beautiful way to talk about it is through the seer and the seen.
Okay.
So again, I'm not a historian. Where we broke off from that, I don't know, but I can tell you, as somebody who grew up Catholic, I feel that you did too.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
You're
And
preaching to the
I,
choir. You're preaching to the choir, sister.
okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So I feel most confident talking about, my own experiences, but I will, I guess, expand that to Christianity overall. But again, being very clear that Catholicism is what I was most exposed to. There's so much terror in that system of thought. Here you have a man teaching love, teaching about social justice, um, and he's murdered for those teachings. So in a sense, right, Jesus, you could say, is equivalent perhaps to the Buddha or Patanjali. He was a yogi. He was teaching things that yoga teaches. Me and my father are one. Consciousness is all there is, right? But yet, a lot of us who are born into these traditions, we're exposed to this image of a man up on a cross with blood and, thorns around his head. And it's a system of thought that is very terrifying. Now, yoga is a mind-body practice. The terror must come out of the system. The nervous system is really the key indicator. The body keeps the score. So whereas yoga is encouraging and inviting everybody to trust and deeply have faith in the field that supports, the Christian culture is very different. Heaven is somewhere else. We murder our people. Don't talk about love. Don't talk about justice. So I feel like that's one way. Again, it's not deep history. It's only like 2,000 years ago, but I definitely see it. And look at, we dated time from that moment.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very important cultural complex to start with. Of course, we can keep going back in history, but that's one that certainly has deeply impacted most of Euro-American culture.
Yeah, you know, and I wanted to talk about that because I know I saw that in one of your posts, and it was so profound. I was reading that, and I was like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. Like, what happened? Like, how did we get here? And you think about it, like we measure, like you said, measure time from that 2,000 years ago. And you think about, and when you said in that post, it's like, can you imagine if we had, you know, accepted that into our hearts and where we would be as as humanity? And I sometimes I kind of get I get a little frustrated, you know, with humanity in some days. And I think, what if, like, what if we took those ideas, those philosophies, and just integrate them into our daily life? I mean, sure, it's not gonna be the easiest thing in the world, but if we just take, you know, time to integrate, like where would we be? Where would it be? Like where would humanity be at this present moment? I don't think we'd be in this craziness that we're seeing now. Like, cause I mean, it's pretty nutty.
Right. It is. It's extremely chaotic. It's actually both. So I love to keep myself educated and learning new systems of thought. And at the moment, I'm studying Dan Siegel's interpersonal neurobiology. And I love the way he frames it. He talks about the flow of integration. And if you look at the DSM, which is basically the psychiatric Bible of diagnosing psychopathology, every single diagnosis falls either into the category of chaos or rigidity. And what we're looking for is this flow of integration where the mind body unity is understood and we can take a comfortable seat in the body. And also, we're integrated to the field that informs, totally informs everything. And that's the field of, some people call it pure awareness or pure consciousness. So integration, I think, is a really beautiful word to point us towards what it is that we're looking for. And again, to use Dan's language, which I think is really strong, it's the differentiation and the linkage, right? We
Okay.
want to differentiate because the enmeshment can also cause a lot of the chaos. So we want to make sure we're differentiating the pieces and clearly seeing them. And then we want everything to be linked. We want a coherent narrative. We want to be able to tell the story of our own personal lives for sure. How did I get here? If I'm, you know, let's say suffering, or I have, again, to use this term, complexes, which we can pull apart any of these words that feel necessary, that basically in psychology, in-depth psychology, what a complex means is it's a core pattern of thoughts and emotions around a common theme, which has to do with like a wounded area of the psyche most often. And we want to depotentiate and take the energy out of there and get that energy back into the flow of integration. So those complexes can cause lots of chaos in our lives, and they can also cause lots of control and rigidity in a, I want to say, a rigidly fear-based response.
Yeah. Do you find that it is a fear-based response? It's just the unknown of it, the lack of trust and the fear of integration into it. It's kind of looking at those aspects of ourselves that are not necessarily the best. Is that what you're finding?
Oh, that's, and again, that's depth psychology at its best, is shadow work, is to look at those aspects of ourselves that we do not know, right? But
Yeah.
the complexes, which have to do with, again, when the mind starts spinning, you know that a complex is getting activated, or the nervous system either shuts down or completely gets agitated. When there's lots of affect, lots of emotion, you know a complex is getting activated. And so these are keys, these are markers to look for. Yeah, but most people have a hesitancy. They're overwhelmed really by psyche. And that is one question I think we should also ask ourselves as a culture. Why do we not teach psychology or mind in kindergarten, in first grade? I mean, why are we teaching math and different sciences and history before we teach balance, peace, contentment, mind-body practices. So I definitely think the culture needs to take a look at itself and what it's doing for sure.
Yeah, I think there's a real lack of emotional intelligence, that learning experience and stuff like that. I think that'd be so powerful as a society if we could just kind of look back, like you said, and integrate something like that into school. Like, I mean, how many people are actually using any of their math that they learned? I mean, high school was the end of it. It's like math, forget that. I'm not gonna learn. And there's so much. That's why I always enjoyed college versus just regular high school, because it was very rigid. You had to learn these certain subjects. But when you get out of that particular environment and you can start choosing different things and learning about how to, different things, that different thought process. I mean, it's very powerful in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to know how psyche works. We really do. Like, why? Because if history has gone off course, don't we need to understand how the mind works in order to put history back on course? Like, in other words, there's nothing more important than understanding the human psyche. If one person could push a button today and quite literally destroy all of civilization, I think it's really important that human beings walk around with a healthy psyche.
Yeah, that's kind of a good way to put it. Like, I mean, that's, if you look at it at that point, I mean, it kind of freaks me out a bit. Like, think about, wow, if somebody has that type of emotion and they're in control and they could basically decimate the whole population, like, we may want to kind of look at that. What are some of the traits or things that you're finding most often in your practice with people right now? Are you finding a common theme that you're seeing throughout your practice and when you're working with people, or is it just a kind of just a mismatch of everything, or just very much you can see like patterns, repetition of different disorders that are showing up in your practice?
I do actually, and I'm very blessed. I like your podcast is reaching lots of people. I work with people from 5 different continents, and so yeah, there definitely is a wide variety. But one common theme I would say is the fear and the terror that's being held in the body, and I would say most of the time, if not all of the time, the clients have had attachment issues or early childhood wounding within the family, that there was a parent who had not processed their own distress or their trauma, either by growing up, let's just say, in Catholicism or another religious system, or growing up with alcoholism, or lots of parents who had been in the Korean War, the Vietnam War. So there's lots of intergenerational trauma going on. And I would say that would be one common theme, that there are many clients that I have who have fear and terror that are bound up in their nervous system coming through intergenerational means. And that, and also in particular, terrorizing and frightening experiences off of their own parents.
Yeah, I can speak to that, because I was like, when you were talking, it's like, wow, was she like just listening to my thoughts there? Because it's like my parents, my childhood, my parents, and it's like, I did this project years ago about a genogram that was John Bradshaw did some work on, about family history, about how the thought process and how we just pass on a lot of information through our families. And you can look back in the history, like it's almost like a family tree, and you kind of look at everything that your parents thought, how you process it, and then how their grandparents process it. So it's kind of a elaborate thing. You take both sides of each family and you can look down and you break down and see what's happening. And you can see that's how I am because of this experience. But it's also because of what my parents experienced and their grandparents experienced. And it's just like, it just keeps coming down this lineage. And it's just nobody's doing anything about it. But then when you look at yourself and it's like, I need to take responsibility for this. I gotta heal this, because it seems like nobody else has got to do this. You
That's
know?
right. And I think that's what's happening across the globe. There's people just having that exact realization that you just said. Oh my gosh, this is coming through the lineage. Somebody's going to have to do this work. And I don't know if you're a parent, but there's a lot of people coming into that realization and doing it in particular, yes, for themselves, but also for their children and for the generations to come,
Yeah.
which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah. I mean, I just got chills. I got goosebumps about that. I think that's so important, is taking that responsibility. And I think this is what like, you know, I always call it the awakening when people start doing that, not like the woke, but the awakening to those sort of things. And they look like, I got to stop this. I can't continue on like this anymore. You
Right.
know, I need to do something. And that's what I love about having people like you on, because it inspires them and it gives them the opportunity that there are people like yourself out there that who could help them through this process. And you know, I can only speak to my own process, and I've been in therapy, you know, a few years, and it's helped me tremendously. You know, illuminating a lot of stuff in my own life and how I am and stuff like that. And it's not all done. I wish it was. Yeah, I wish I could have one of those pure consciousness of moments and kind of take me out. But then throws me back into reality and go, oh no, I think you're gonna have a few more lessons you got to learn, see if you actually work through this. But I really encourage and I really love the people who take that time to say, I need to change this. I just love that.
Yeah. And then in the realization also through that doorway is the cultural piece that you can't just clearing your own stuff brings you to the threshold of, wow, this is coming because I sit in a culture, my parents sit in a culture, my grandparents. It's just like a sunflower that sits in soil. If it doesn't have the right environment, we are nature, we are of nature. We have to have the right ingredients in the soil, and we have to have the right atmosphere environment in order for that, you know, sunflower to really take hold, you know, metaphorically speaking. So personal work ends up becoming community work in the end, which again is a beautiful thing because relationship is what we need. As I'm saying, a lot of the wounding comes through the relationship. It comes through our experiences off mother or father. And so the healing then comes back around also through the process of relationship. And that's a beautiful wholing, so to speak.
Yeah. So is the environment just as important as the individual work itself to help this process?
I would say, let's go back to Jesus.
Okay.
You want an environment. I remember Robert Thurman, the great Buddhist scholar out of New York, saying one time, Buddha incarnated in India because they could recognize him. It's like, otherwise, we keep doing the work, but the culture keeps swallowing the work back up. So, yeah, right? Look at Martin Luther King. We do not have a great track record for people who come up and come through and want to teach about love and civil rights and social justice. We just don't. We want to wipe these people away and carry on with whatever. In that what do I mean by that? The culture seems to be rolling along so steadily that it wants to swallow up or obliterate those voices. There's a really strong cultural piece going on of whether you call it predatory capitalism or some kind of power over dynamic, the oppressor, the oppressed. And it seems to have a lot of steam and it has a lot of energy behind it. And so, yes, I would say the environment is important. It's nature and nurture. We need to have a nurturing environment for this to really take hold and enough people to have the realization of living in the heart and social justice in order for the paradigm to shift away from the oppressor oppressed into a very communal, common unity, into a very just and peaceful, right? We've had enough. I feel like we've had enough war, enough stress. Like we've already hit the breaking point as far as I'm concerned. and
Yeah.
and now we're just trying to figure out how to get the Titanic steered away from the iceberg.
Yeah. I like that's the one thing, you know, I wanted to have you on just to talk about that and, you know, figure out a way out. And because I know a lot of listeners out there are trying to figure their way out of this and they're trying to figure out a pathway. How do we get out of this? And like you said, there's just, yeah, come on, like we got to figure, I mean, the technology, we got all this crazy technology. I mean, technology is moving faster than our own consciousness. It's like, how do we get that consciousness up there to realize that, okay, we need to stop doing all this crazy stuff. Like, I mean, it is kind of just like, what, really? We need another war? Oh, we need to do this again? It doesn't make sense. We just keep repeating these same patterns.
Well, we do. And if you look at the academic literature and the research, like I said, a lot of it originates in family dynamics. And there's about 35–40% of the population that's walking around with insecure attachment within their family of origin, which means that there is lots of stress going on in their nervous system, or their nervous system is shut down in many ways. They dismiss people. They're very shut down from relationship because of traumas or distress that happened in again, very early childhood experiences. 35–40% of the population, that's a lot of people. And so when you have that kind of adaptation to your own species, where you dismiss human relationships because at a very early age your needs weren't met, or where you're really high strung around other humans because, again, you had lots of terror or frightening experiences. 40% of the population, that's a lot of people walking around with that kind of distress, dysfunction with relationship within their own species. We need to start healing that. That's too many people, and the odds of them getting into positions of power or running corporations that they don't have humanity in mind. They're just not, the humanity has been dismissed altogether.
That's
Let
so true.
alone, let alone, again, the planet and all her other sentient beings. So this is why I think, at the cultural level, we really need to come to terms with teaching psychology, teaching emotional intelligence to our youth. Um, but there's lots of conundrums there, because if you took the disciplines of biology and neuroscience and psychology, they would not agree on what emotion is, what consciousness is, and what mind is. So we're in a complex muddle within the Academy of Euro-American Culture, because we don't have agreement on some very, very foundational aspects of our human experience.
So how do we bridge that gap? Like, how do we change that thought process? I mean, if nobody's agreeing on anything, so how do we get this beautiful information that, I mean, it's not, I don't think it's just general in the I mean, it's worldwide, I believe, the same idea. I just believe that the philosophies, if you look at all the different cultures around the world, it's fundamentally a lot of the same things, same themes are going through us, or same ideologies going across. But how do we just, yeah, so how do we actually bridge that gap then? So how do we manage that?
Well, I like to talk about Euro-American culture mostly because it's, again, the one I'm sitting in. Um, so it's the one I'm most familiar with. I do think that there are indigenous psychologies that are far more holistic. So yes, I think you can look around the globe, but that's why I feel most comfortable talking about my own culture, specifically because I also feel like my own culture perpetuates so much violence around the world out of greed. Um, so I want to take ownership of the culture that I sit in, for sure. Um, and you do find holism, I believe, in yoga psychology. I think it's one of the most logically consistent psychologies that I've been exposed to. It has been making its way across the globe. It has really infiltrated the Euro-American culture, at least here in Los Angeles. Until COVID, there was a yoga studio on every block or every half block. And if somehow either through the discipline of consciousness studies, which is a fairly new discipline that's definitely working towards, I would say, coherence, or to integrate physics, neuroscience, psychology, to get an agreement on what consciousness is, again, in Euro-America, because in India, in the Orthodox and non-Orthodox Hindu traditions, there is disagreement around consciousness, but they're all still dialoguing with each other in really coherent ways. We don't necessarily have that as much. Um, so how these conferences on consciousness studies are the only thing I know at the moment, I would say, or these organizations that work towards the mind-body unity, those are our strongest bets. I don't know, maybe you have some ideas around that, but
No, I really don't. I mean, I really think that again, there's got to be something that bridges that gap somehow. I think it's experience. I think most people don't have the experience. I mean, they're gaining knowledge, but they have no wisdom with that because they're not integrating any experience because they can talk about it, intellectually, they can talk about it, for days, but they never experience what you've experienced. So I don't think that they have that foundation to kind of go, okay, now I know what I'm talking about.
right. But again, we also don't have a coherent framework. And in my book, Consciousness in Jung and Patañjali, that's one of the things I speak to at the very end. It's like we need a coherent framework. And why I love to teach yoga philosophy and yoga psychology is because it's extremely coherent. So there's an 8-limb path by Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras. And the first limb is the yamas. And yama means the end. And he's talking, and here's the 5 yamas. It's nonviolence, truthfulness, non-stealing, walking in the awareness of the highest reality, and non-greed. He's saying bring an end to your violence, to any of your lying, to yourself or to other people. Do not steal. Always walk with this vertical connection, because consciousness is all there is. So stay open to that source. And by consciousness, in yoga psychology, they mean knowledge is structured in it. It knows exactly what it's doing. You can't play a trip out on it. And as I keep describing this, hopefully this will become more clear. So always walk in the awareness that consciousness is all there is, and then don't be greedy. Because again, consciousness is all there is. So you ultimately can't steal from it. If you try to own more than just you need to light up whatever is right in front of you, then you're going to get yourself in trouble, because now you're bounding and grasping after it. So those are the yamas. He's saying put an end to your violence, to your lying. Then the next limb is the niyamas, which means to begin. And those are purity, contentment, tapas, being willing to sit in the fire of your own purification, study, self-study and study of scripture, and then surrender to God. So again, your yamas put an end to what I mentioned, the violence, the stealing, the lying, and then the niyamas to begin. You start with purity, i.e., always stay pure, because consciousness is exactly what I just told you it was in the first sutra.
Makes sense.
And if we could grok that, it changes everything.
Yeah, and it's so simple. I mean, it's not like it's really advanced stuff. I mean, it's very common sense, and I think we have this. It's integrated already into our mind, body, soul. Anyways, it's already there. It's at that level. We already have it integrated. Like, and we just got to clear away the junk, and it's already there. We already know that. It's like it's like we talk about the Christianity part about the 10 Commandments. We know how to live, like we really do at a soul level. We know how to do this. But we just got to, like you said, you got to purify, you got to get that stuff out of the way. But it's so basic. Like, but I think that's the brilliant part about it. It is so basic. Like you go, yeah, that makes sense. I could do that.
Well, that's the logical consistency. Exactly right. It's so basic because it's fundamental, because it's actually who we are. And why? And so the third limb of yoga is the asana, the embodied. That's what most of us in the West know, the hatha yoga, the postures. And then the next limb is pranayama, which is breath work. Now, you put all those 4 together. To your point, it's so basic to who we are that your breath is going to show you when you move out of that awareness of the highest reality. Your body is going to show you the discomfort. If you turn towards fear, if you're terrorized, again, either through memory or in the immediate present, immediately the breath in the body, you can't play a trip on it. And if we could understand that and how unbelievably intelligent our breath and our nervous system and our heart rate variability are, the moment we really, really get that, it's going to change the game forever, because our body is showing us everything. It is the truth, if you will. The mind can go off into imagination. It can go back into traumatic memory, right? But there is a truth that it can also reflect, and it knows when it's in that truth because the body and the breath cohere.
Yeah, that is so true. And I mean, that's the interesting thing. The body always knows, they always say, like, in any type of a holistic practice, they say the issues are in the tissues. Like, you just can't lie. Like, I mean, if there's something going on in the body, everything's out of whack.
That's right. And again, back to the yamas, right? What's the second one? Truthfulness. Because this thing it is nothing but truth.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so brilliant. Now, as far as going back to, I want to touch on part about how to get that trauma, that energy out of the body. I know with yoga, they have certain positions to help, again, open up the energy pathways within the body to release that. Is that what you normally do? Like, once you figured out the initial trauma or the initial original wounding of that, and it's usually either stored in, the first or second energy centers, or third, or, completely all over the place. Is it through your yoga practice, that you encourage your patients to help release that, or certain positions that help release that memory, that trapped energy within the body?
Yes, movement. So the postures can absolutely be great, but walking is great too. So absolutely, yes, moving the body, breath work, and there's many different breath practices out there. Different people respond to different practices. So finding the practice that works for you. Meditating, if you can. Some people who are very traumatized, both with breath work and with meditating, like closing their eyes isn't the thing that's going to work for them. It'll actually rev their system back up. So leaving their eyes open with a soft focus and a breathing practice. So absolutely, breath practices and body movement. Working with a therapist or a coach who's trauma informed is very helpful. And then being able to write out your narrative. And those pieces typically fall into place over time. But definitely the research shows that being able to have a coherent narrative absolutely helps strengthen the healing and integration process. So being able to see, okay, my parents were struggling. My dad came out of the war and, started using alcohol very heavily, and he was a rageaholic and screamed, and therefore I got terrorized as a child. Being able to put those pieces together is another really key component towards integration and healing.
Yeah, I mean, that's so important. If you can get back, just give yourself a little bit of objectivity. That's what I've learned. If you just pull yourself back just from your story, just to kind of be that observer a bit. And like you said, just realize, okay, dad was this way because, he just came out of the war, and he's got I mean, war in general will just screw anybody up anyways. And then he's trying to integrate whatever he learned, any lessons in life. And then he had this traumatic incident. He's using alcohol, and he's got all that rage because he can't express his emotion, the pain that he's actually feeling for what happened during the war, what he's witnessed himself. And then he transfers that onto the child. But as the child, if you can just kind of just slowly kind of look back, just kind of realize. And I know from my own self, my own experiences, it really gave me a little bit of clarity. It's like, okay, I really understand now what the whole process was. Sure, I was affected, but my mother and my dad were also affected too as well. Which is that little bit of just that leeway enough to kind of go, okay, it just gives you that breathing room. Okay, I can relax a bit.
Right. And trusting, all right, well, somehow I'm here. So yes, the generation before me didn't do the work, but here I am. So it's up to me to, if I want to feel good, to actually do this work. And therefore, because a lot of times forgiveness can be really challenging, especially when there's lots of trauma and wounding. People, however, it's often said, and it is true, forgiveness is forgiving our own self the gift, but I love Jack Cornfield's framing around it. He says, forgiveness is for giving up all hope of a better past. It's really profound.
Could you just say
Just,
that again? Could you just say that again? Because I think that's really profound. So I want my
it's,
listeners to really think.
it,
So listen, guys.
it's really profound.
Yeah.
Forgiveness, this is Jack Cornfield, forgiveness is for giving up all hope of a better past. Because we want to get out of the mind bind that keeps sending us into the memory. Traumatic memory will keep playing itself out until that breath work and the nervous system come into a healing hold state, frame of reference. So it's like, okay, the past was the past. And especially the more of us that do this work, then there's more welcoming communities to be involved with, to have the reciprocity of love and kindness and compassion. And then being able to, it's not why did this happen to me, but how. And to me, that's the coherence. I can see how, because this gets passed on generation to generation. I literally come out of my mother's womb and I'm now in the family psyche. I have no alternative but to swim inside the wounds of my parents and then therefore also my culture. There's no alternative. So it's not a why, because somehow I'm here, but it's a how. How do we get here? And we can see how we get here.
Yeah. I
And
think
that
that's,
becomes really healing.
yeah, I think that's the power. That's the power there, is that observation. And it's so interesting because we're always usually in the why. We're always in that victim martyr kind of state. And it's, you see it so often, and it just seems to be like all over the place. Everybody's in their victim martyr energy. And if you kind of remove that, it's like, okay, how? That's that switch. And I think those little small switches are so illuminating and so powerful. And like you said, allows for that healing to begin. Now, do you work with your patients? Do you do any I know you talked about coherence a lot. Do you do like any heart math work, heart brain coherence techniques with them and breathing techniques, or maybe any EMDR to help release some of that stress with them at all?
I have the heart math, boy, what's it called?
Monitor?
Whatever the device is. I have one for myself. I don't yet have it for my clients, though I have considered it. Pre-COVID, I worked with craniosacral therapy for my inpatient clients. I haven't gone back to a hands-on practice, but I love craniosacral therapy. It helps bring people into the still point. Just by, it's a very, very gentle touch technique. I'm sure you've probably been exposed to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I
And
love it.
it's really, really beautiful. And again, it's relational. Really, there's trust that gets built up between myself and my clients, for them to really deeply rest and relax, and then to allow their own still point to come forward, and therefore the body to work to reset itself. So that was my hands-on practice. I'll get back to it at some point, but I haven't yet
Yeah, this COVID
picked it
thing
back
is
up
really
again.
kicking our butts in so many different ways. But did you find, like, when you do that sort of work, I mean, it could be so profound. Like, I mean, it's the gentlest technique. I know myself, and when I'm struggling things like that, it's just that profound. Just placing your hand, like your head in somebody's hands, and that touch, just that touch, and just the movement of that energy, moving and shifting that. I've had such profound releases on there. I bawled like a 2-year-old. Just have that cathartic release out there. Do you find with some of your clients that they just kind of get that state, and then the door opens, the floodgates, and all this energy and emotion just comes out?
I have had it for sure. I've had people who have that kind of release. But I've also had people who have very gentle bit by bit release over the course of, let's say, 6 months, just little by little, their nervous system is able to relax a little bit more and a little bit more. And um, yeah, their nervous system is in a whole different state like 6 months later. So where it was really kind of jacked up and buzzy when they first started with me, then 6 months later, there's really great progress in their ability to have a calm and censored nervous system.
Yeah, I think that's
So,
really important. Yeah, just
it,
to have
it,
that.
and to your point, you know, a lot of people aren't touched or touched with love very early on. This goes to, again, this idea of insecure attachment and what we're seeing in many parent-child relationships. And so to lay on a table and have your head just held, you know, very gently, or to, you know, any other in craniosacral therapy, for your listeners who don't know, we stay fully clothed. The client stays fully clothed, they lay on their back, and it's just like the weight of a nickel. It's very, very light touch technique. But you know, some people grow up in families where there isn't a lot of touching, and so just to have that kind of gentle touch technique can be very inviting and very new to their
Yeah.
body.
Yeah, yeah, I'm a big fan of body work. Yeah, like it doesn't matter which type of body work, whatever works for you, whether it's acupuncture or chiropractics and craniosacral therapy, excuse me. But also anything like that, and massage work too as well. Just, you know, again, it's all about the body, and it'll be so happy when you get that type of work and you get that release and that movement of energy. It really gets you in tune with what's happening within the body, but also in your mind as well. Because again, you know, I always go back that the issue is in the tissue, and once you start releasing that, and massage therapists, you think, oh, you got a sore neck, and then all of a sudden, this memory or this emotion starts coming up, and it starts flooding the body, and you just realize that, oh, this has just been all that anger and tension that I had about my father, and you just think it was just because you've been sitting at your computer for 8 hours a day, but it had nothing to do with really sitting at the computer. It's just been all that anger and hatred that you had stored up in the body for so many years.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's profound. It's really, it's, you know, profound, but it's beautiful in its synergy and, again, coherence, and it's whole at its basis, in other words, right? Wholeness, you know, I'm a Jungian oriented depth psychologist, and so, you know, wholeness is kind of the what we look for on the horizon.
The Holy Grail.
But yeah, exactly. But through the lens of really the ancient wisdom traditions in yoga, the wholeness is the thing that you already are. What you want to look for is the thing that's broken you off from the wholeness.
Interesting. I like that analogy.
Right? Again, back at your depths, you are the yamas and the niyamas, and you are the centered nervous system. At its depth, consciousness is all there is. This thing knows exactly what it is. What is the thing that caused the split? What's the thing that caused the distress, the irritation? And that makes also healing that much more palpable and present. It's already here. It's more like clouds moving away from the sun, really, healing, because the wholeness is already there. We just want to, it's like an excavation site. We just want to keep looking for, again, the cultural pieces, you know, and the family pieces. And then, of course, any personal pieces that were added on that have broken us away from that holistic vision and that groundedness, the holistic experience of being one with the earth and all her sentient beings and all her people.
Yeah, that is so fascinating. Another area that I wanted to touch on is that I read on your website there you work with people with I guess the expression would be non-ordinary states of consciousness where people are using psychedelics. Is that because I've known so many other podcasters, of course, you know, the Podfather Joe Rogan talked a lot about psychedelics on his show, and this kind of need for psychedelics to kind of wake humanity up, and I guess that's kind of the theme. Are you finding more people using psychedelics to kind of fast track them into this process of awareness and pure consciousness?
I would say this. there's no fast track without good integration. I mean, look, I had what many people would have perhaps on a psychedelic trip in broad daylight in a yoga room. Without guidance, tools, the right techniques, it's all just phenomena. So whether you're looking at an atom through, or whatever you would look at through a microscope, versus whether you're looking at something through ketamine or LSD or mushrooms. And again, this is where yoga is really strong. It's the seer and the seen. You still have to make sense and integrate what you're seeing. So that's what I would say. I'm a fan. I'm absolutely a fan of psychedelics and ayahuasca, mushrooms, but the integration process, and again, that ability to tell the coherent narrative, you can't run away from those pieces from what I can see. There's no spiritual bypass. So it's a great adjunct, and it's definitely helpful, but it will not eradicate whatever one would need to do in the body. So it might give you a new experience, it might give you a new vista, and God knows we do need that. However, to the degree that it isn't also, eradicating, like my own experience, it didn't go eradicate my whole past. And the other thing I would say to that is, I know people who have done psychedelics for 2.5 decades. They're still in a neurotic pattern. So if that says anything, and they sit in sacred circles too. It's not just, they're not just taking the medicines. They're sitting with, I don't sit with them, so I don't know their shaman or who it is. But so it isn't, I don't know that it's going to be the panacea. The integration piece is for sure, I would say, a crucial part.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, anything that's going to help humanity move forward in consciousness, yeah, I'm on board. Yeah. And if it, again, plant medicine has been around since we incarnated here. So it's not something new. I mean, all the ancient cultures, everybody's talked about that. But again, it's that integration. Like, so many people are into the spiritual bypass. They think if I do this, everything's going to be healed and I can just carry on with life. But sometimes it can make things worse because you don't have that integration and that information to come back into it. And then you can really get into some real neurosis and problems.
100%. I'm so glad that you're unpacking this topic, because it's true. And there are 10 to 15% of the population walking around with disorganized attachment, which has to do with, and again, attachment being the style of adaptation with our family of origin and our primary caregivers. Disorganized attachment has like dissociation in adult life. And so if you go and do these medicines and you have dissociated aspects of the psyche, and one aspect of the psyche that is really hanging on to traumatic memories, now you're perhaps creating even greater distance in order to link these things back. So I'm a fan, but they're no joke. I've had many clients come to see me who, God bless, have done 5-MeO and had no integration with their shaman afterwards, and they sat on 6 months of not sleeping, a jacked up nervous system. So again, I'm a fan, but integration, coherence, being able to put everything into perspective, critical.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. I think that I always hate regulation, but I think there has to be, a coherent way of doing things. It's a beautiful experience from what I hear. A lot of people have this great experiences, but again, it's that integration where you can just really set you off even worse than what you began with. And some people just use it as I guess they're kind of like psychedelic tourists, and they don't realize the damaging effects of it too. But I love the fact that part of your practice is to help these people through that if they do that. do you recommend kind of like working with them first before they start doing something like that, kind of get a little wholeness, little something under their belt? And if they wanted to do that, maybe then you could be able to, now you kind of have a core idea of what's going on with them to help them guide them through after if they decide to do that on their own.
I don't really have a preference. I'll enter in anybody's stream wherever they want to invite me in. So I don't necessarily have a preference. Yeah, I don't have a preference to that, but I do want to speak very briefly to the regulation point. And I haven't done much reading on it yet, but I know it's right here at the threshold. I know what's going on with NAS, on the trading in the stock market and maps and all this stuff. Look, psychiatry and what big pharma, their perspective on psyche is not what depth psychology's perspective on psyche is. Psyche means soul. Psychology, by and large, should be treating soul ailments. The psychiatric industry pathologizes mental and emotional states that may very well be a reaction to an illness in culture. So whatever they're going to do to regulate psychedelics, whatever that governing body is, if it doesn't understand where the illness is in the culture, it's just Prozac 3.0. We're going to go nowhere. You have to spot where the breaks are in the culture and what is distressing people. Because if the culture's sick, and then the psychedelic industry and the the pharmacy industry only pander to the culture that's already sick, we're going nowhere. We're just on the treadmill.
Yeah. That mouse, that's the continuous thing. We haven't learned anything. It's just, let's just figure out how we can make money off this.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. And that goes back to that whole thing with greed, right?
That's right. Exactly. And then how do you, the niyamas to begin, your purity is already way off track.
Yeah. So true. Yeah. Well, that being said, Dr. Leanne, we're almost out of time.
Wow, we are.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been great to speak with you and talk about these really important topics.
Yeah. And I actually struggled with this one. Usually most of my podcast interviews are really easy. And my thought process was I was trying to see how I could articulate what I really wanted to come across. But a lot of the information you already had out there, and I was just trying to pick parts of how we can illuminate people, get them inspired, trying to get some knowledge at the same time too, trying to bring all these little aspects and all that beautiful wisdom that you had into the podcast. And I struggled with it. I was like, how the hell am I going to figure this out? And it ate at me for a couple of days trying to figure out. I was like, okay, screw it. Just go with the flow and just kind of let things happen. But I really appreciate your beautiful wisdom, your information that you have out there. If everybody's listening, please follow Dr. Whitney on her Instagram, Dr. Leanne Whitney. But that being said, how can they find you on the World Wide Web? So is it just drwhitney.com or where can they find you?
LeanneWhitney.com will get them there. Yep, to my webpage. I'm also, I have a Facebook page, so I interact with people a little bit there.
Okay.
But most of my work is one-on-one. Every now and then, next January, I'll do an online class again. And I am preparing to teach an online class for Jung Academy. But most of my work, at least for the moment, is still one-on-one.
Oh, fantastic. And I think that one-on-one touch is really, really important. I think that's a lot of people get a lot of benefit out of that. But I'll have all the information in the description below. So if you want to contact Dr. Whitney and you want to work with some things, I think you would have such an amazing healing process with that. So again, thank you so much. I'm just going to close off the show here. So this has been the Metaphysical Mentor Podcast with Michael Philpott. Thank you so much for joining me, and goodbye for now.